Confronted a rude boomer at Walmart who was harassing an employee and making racist comments, and now I plan to pay a visit to his boss. I went into my local Walmart tonight for a quick grocery trip to pick up some stuff I was low on. Quick in and out trip, 15 minutes at most. Sad to say it didn't end up being a fast trip because when I arrived at checkout, I was stuck behind a boomer who wanted to cause a scene. The guy in front of me was with his wife, who were arguing loudly about God knows what. They had a substantial amount of stuff on the belt, including a few large bottles of various alcohols. When the boomer scanned his way back to the bottles of alcohol, he froze and began searching around for an associate, who I presume he wanted to come and scan his ID. The problem was that he didn't scan any of the bottles. He just locked up and stared directly at a girl who was busy at the monitor for the self-checkout registers the next all over. After about 30 to 45 seconds of not scanning anything, he loudly shouted "excuse me" in his most condescending tone, followed by "can you come and scan my fucking ID please?" His tactic worked, as the employee in question immediately whipped around and walked over. He was doing that typical arms crossed bullshit, looking like everything was a giant inconvenience, and I will note, homie still hadn't scanned a single bottle of alcohol yet. When this young woman was in speaking range, the boomer began to lay into her. It makes me real sick to see workers just standing around when they're on the clock doing nothing when people like me have schedules to keep. "Can you do your fucking job please and scan my ID? Excuse me?" She responded. "You fucking heard me. Get off your goddamn phone and scan my card so I can get the hell out of here." Now, I would like to note a few things about this interaction up to this point. First, this individual was still in a work outfit, a mechanic's onesie for a local mom and pop tire company I won't name here, but one in which I know the owner pretty well. He's a family friend. Second, he was still wearing his name tag, Eric. Somehow I hope you're competent enough to find your way here so you can see this story. Because of this, I knew how to address him. Eventually he asks the cashier very rudely if she's going to scan his ID and she flat out tells him no, I don't think so. Not after how you've treated me. You can talk with my manager. Good for her. She gets on a walkie and calls for a manager to come to the register the boomer was towering over and briskly walked off towards the customer service counter at the front of the store. The boomer starts loudly hollering about how this is all bullshit and he's just expressing his First Amendment rights. It was at this point where I actually found some balls and decided to give my opinion, unsolicited, just so this guy could get an outside perspective on how much of a jackass he was being. Excuse me, but the First Amendment doesn't protect you from looking like a douchebag to random strangers in Walmart when you treat other people like shit. The guy wheeled around and locked eyes with me. "What did you just say to me?" I just smirked and said, "Oh, hard of hearing are we? I'm pretty sure you heard what I said." The guy visibly shook on the spot. "This isn't any of your fucking business, so butt out." I disagree. When I see someone acting like an asshole for no good reason, I make it a point to speak up. You seem to think that by stating that you have a First Amendment right means you can say whatever the hell you want without consequence, but that isn't how it works, sir. First Amendment protects you from government overreach for speaking your mind, but it doesn't protect you from the consequences you face from others for your words or your opinions. That's besides the point. I'm sick and fucking tired of these minorities doing nothing and getting a paycheck for it. He responded, rather loudly and unaware that there were quite a few people staring at this point. Hooray. Racism has entered the chat. The manager showed up, and he starts in on how he scanned his alcohol and that the associate in question was very rude to him and refused to serve him. He started stating that she told him he wouldn't get help because he was white when I interjected again. "Ma'am, that is not what happened. This gentleman didn't even scan any of his alcohol and immediately started shouting down at your employee, just for the sake of being upset. He was rude, unpleasant, and even made unnecessary racial comments. He wheeled around at me again and yelled, 'Shut the fuck up and mind your business,' before going on the tirade again. Something lazy workers, something First Amendment and speaking his mind. You know, this is very unfair of you." I started again. "You've put that poor girl in an unwinnable situation. Now that you've raised this untrue complaint, her manager is going to have words with her even though she hasn't done anything wrong. Does that sound fair to you, Eric?" I don't think he realized he was still in uniform, because he looked at me puzzled at how I knew his name. "How would you feel if someone came into your place of business and told John a bunch of bullshit about how you were treating them unfairly when you knew perfectly well that it was a lie? Or even better, how would your boss react if he knew you were acting like this while still in uniform with his place of business plastered all over your chest?" When he heard me say the name of his boss, he stopped cold. "Yes, Eric. I know John very well, and I think I might be paying him a visit tomorrow. That is unless you decide to apologize to that girl for being a lying prick instead." The guy then became very rushed and suddenly in a colossal hurry. He muttered something about people not minding their own business, to which I replied with, "I'm just reassessing my First Amendment rights." SpongeBob's sarcastic voice and all. He scanned one of the bottles and had the manager scan his ID. His wife started in about how I better not show up to his office tomorrow, something directed at me, but I wasn't paying her any attention and brushed her off. I was just staring at Eric and watching him bag. Eventually, he got all of his stuff put in his basket and he marched out, but he didn't apologize to the manager or the employee and gave me a hearty "go fuck yourself, asshole." As he flipped me off. I scanned my groceries and paid for my merchandise, but man was I smiling from ear to ear. Afterwards, I made it a point to go and speak with the manager and the employee in the customer service center. As expected, the manager was having a conversation with the employee about that customer, and she thanked me for speaking up. I've worked retail before, so I know what it's like having to deal with assholes like Eric. It'd be a cold day in hell before I let a boomer bully an employee then weasel his way into a victim role with management. Not on my fucking watch. So now my next play is to show up to this tire shop tomorrow. I really hope Eric is there. I hope he's the opener. I'm going to walk in and just smile at him. Ask to see his manager. Then I think I'm going to go in and just weave the nicest story about how he treated the employees at Walmart, so much so that I was compelled to stop in and tell his boss that he has a real winner on his hands, and that I'm a customer for life now. Maybe that way, he might get a message. Maybe, he will realize that I could have started a whole shitstorm for him, but I chose not to, because unlike him, I'm not a fucking dickhead. Oop, this is what bothered me most. Had he just scanned even a single bottle, he would have gotten what he wanted. Unless perhaps what he wanted was to just be angry at someone. Then he did get what he wanted. Update 1. Some of the reasons you gave were pretty telling. My favorite was when someone said something along the lines of "this is too well written to be true." What a world we live in where clear dictation automatically disqualifies a recounting of events from being accurate. I'll admit that it read closer to a novel than anything else, but that's just how I dictate, I guess. Anyways, on to the update. I arrived at the tire shop just a hair after 8 a.m. There was one gentleman in line at the counter when I arrived, but he was already being assisted by one of the associates manning the register. I took a look around and peeked my head in the back office area where I knew John typically worked when he wasn't being pulled into a bay. John wasn't there. As I walked towards the sitting area, I happened to ask an employee who was walking by if he knew when John would be in today. He told me John usually arrives a bit before 9 a.m. when he worked mornings, so I should just chill for a bit. I didn't have anything pressing to attend to today, so I did just that. As I moved towards a seat, I happened to glance outside at the working bays and noticed my old buddy Eric, who was currently walking towards the main building. When he saw me, I watched as his head drooped down and I could visibly see him mutter the word "fuck" under his breath. He stopped for just a second, shook his head, and continued walking towards the building. When he came inside, he set a packet with what I presume was a customer order on the counter and said something to the clerk at the register. He hesitated for a moment and walked over to where I was sitting. As he approached, I greeted him with "Morning, Eric," and smiled. He just stood over me for a moment before he took a chair across the coffee table that was sitting in front of me. Wonder what his next move was? Honestly, I didn't expect it, but the dude opened with "I owe you an apology." Color me shocked, I guess. Now, you see, at this point about a billion things began to run around in my head. Mostly, for some reason, the things that ran most prominently through my mind were all the calls for bloodshed that popped up in the last thread. All the claims that boomers can never learn and the only language they knew was bullying, which were thrown at me like mortars practically every step I took. Y'all were bloodthirsty last night and still were this morning, convinced that this gentleman was a drunkard asshat, but do drunk asshats apologize after doing something wrong? Back to the story. He continued on, saying that he didn't just owe me an apology, but also the cashier he yelled at last night, and how he had actually planned on returning to Walmart on his lunch break to see if she was working so he could apologize to her as well. In his words, I've been dealing with a lot of personal shit in my life recently, including the loss of a loved one, and I took that out on y'all last night and it wasn't right. Right about this time is when I noticed that John had arrived. He walked in through the door behind where Eric and I were sitting and walked straight into the back area I checked before. We will get to that later. Guys, I honestly had no idea what to do. On one hand, yes, this dude was a raging douchebag to that girl last night, but this felt genuine. I mentioned several times in the first thread that I didn't want to react hastily, and this is exactly why. Had I gone in there and thrown a colossal fit and started a shitstorm, I don't know if this would have ended the same. Anyways, I don't wish to grandstand things further. The guy apologized, I stood up and shook his hand, and I simply told him be good to people for no reason, man. Kindness is free and isn't a sign of weakness. We chatted a bit and had a bit of a revelation that Eric and I have a distant connection neither of us really knew about. I won't disclose what or how we knew each other for personal reasons. Then John came out of the back office. He recognized me and gave me a hug. Asked what I was in for. I basically told him that I ran into Eric at the store last night and wanted to check in on him and get an update on an issue he was having there. That's when John said, "Yeah, Eric, I need to talk to you about that. I had a lady call me about something that happened at Walmart you were involved in." Oh shit. I'm guessing either the manager or the cashier called John after what happened last night. I guess the ball isn't in my court any longer. Eric gave a deep sigh and basically told John I was a shithead to a cashier last night because I was in a hurry. I wasn't thinking and it wasn't right. I'm gonna make it right at lunchtime. I hope she's working today. John then said something I didn't catch and him and Eric walked into the back room. That's it. End of story. I took a scrap from a notebook, jotted down my proof and snapped a photo, then jumped in my car and left. I do apologize if this left anyone feeling unfulfilled. I certainly hope that this brings you guys whatever closure you were looking for. I'm certain some of you aren't going to be happy with how this turned out, given how many pitchforks I saw last night. But after all this, all I can say is to not be so hasty when jumping to conclusions. People are people, y'all. You can't really be sure what someone is going through before you jump to judgment. Some folks don't know how to ask for forgiveness or don't know how to take responsibility for their actions, but some folks can. I'm glad this resolved itself the way it did. John knows what happened and knows that it happened with his business on full display, so he can now choose how he reacts with that information. I got the closure I needed, and I hope the cashier does too. Time will tell in that regard, I suppose. Be good to each other. Keep being kind. It's genuinely a real-life superpower. The universe rewards kindness in kind. But do drunk asshats apologize after doing something wrong? Oop, almost like most people are human with intricate human experiences, and Opal don't always slot into the same stereotypical mold we cast for them.